What do you think are the attributes that makes like a really good open source contributor?
One thing that I think is extremely undervalued in software engineering in general and technical position is just like code orientation, like just being able to find your way in a large code base. Because like you end up on like these messy big repos that are layered with stuff, right? Like you join a company like Facebook, there's like 2 big mono repos with 100 different ways of doing things and like, you know, thousands of microservices. Similarly, like, you know, you want to contribute to Airflow, Superset, or really any open source project out there. Where do you start? Like maybe you want to change the color of a button. Like where is that button? Where do you find it? Or you want to add a field to a dashboard. That's the common data engineering problem I'm so disinterested in. That's like, oh, we get this data from HubSpot and there's a dashboard, and then we got to carry this new custom property all the way through the pipeline to the end. What is that pipeline? Like where's this dashboard pointing to? So I think code orientation, being able to find your way in a large repository and figuring out what to do and how to decipher everything that's been done before and why is extremely key.
For maybe someone starting, are there easier projects to start with? Maybe that's not in Rust, you know.
Yeah, well, so I think it's all relative to where you're starting from, but I think like purpose is what's most important. So you pip install a library, it doesn't quite do what you need it to do, or you find a bug, or it'd be nice if this method existed. Right. To go and then start with just scratching your itch in someone else's repository is a really nice way to get involved, because it will force this little bit of exploration I was talking about, developing the code navigation skill. Like, okay, I pip install this library, I'm reading the documentation, the method I need is not there, the documentation is not clear on something, let me get to the bottom of this. Then you have to get in that repo and figure out your orientation in that repo, clone it, contribute something, interact with someone, and I don't know, maybe eventually like make a friend along the way.
I'm sure there were a lot of pros through like Airflow and Preset. Like how did you go about handling problem children?
Welcome to the Software Misadventures podcast. We are your hosts, Ronak and Guan. As engineers, we are interested in not just the technologies, but the people and the stories behind them. So on this show, we try to scratch our own itch by sitting down with engineers, founders, and investors to chat about their path, lessons they have learned, and of course, the misadventures along the way. Talking about the open source projects, now you've built successfully a lot of open source projects. I think, at least as far as Superset and Airflow are concerned, they've become more or less the de facto choices in their own domains. Like I know a lot of companies using Airflow for workflow management, for example. What used to be Azkaban back in, I think, 2011, 12 is getting completely replaced.
Well, I was going to say Luigi, but
or Luigi.
Uzi. Dating yourself there.
Yeah, I know. So what I meant to say is, you started these open source projects which have become super successful, and you've done it more than once. What are some of the common ingredients there?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think there's a lot of parallels to be drawn with so I call it like project community fit is like product market fit, and product market fit is a multi-dimensional, like very complicated thing. They're just like timing, like what's the I'll be talking about product market fit because I think and then we can translate some of these learnings to project community fit, like a fit of an open source project. But in PMF, I think timing is a huge thing. Like, what is the market? How ripe is it? How ripe is it to be disrupted? And in what way? What's the minimum viable product, right? Like, and what's what's the TAM of that market, and how much can you put towards it? So at first you need clearly like something that there's a need for, and then you need to address an unaddressed need somewhere out there. So like for Airflow, is probably there's no really good or like data orchestrator with like data pipelines as code, though like arguably there was some before, like I think Uzi was like XML. You mentioned like Luigi, Azkaban. And then there's a whole generation of like GUI driven tools like Informatica and Data Stage and other things. But there's that. There's also like, you know, kind of the founder, the founder fit where, you know, like I'd been in data engineering for probably 15 years at the time, or like in the ancestor of data engineering, and then at the place that was pushing a big change in that area. So I think I was like the right person at the right time with the right ideas, where those stars, you know, you can't really make them align. They just align, like, you know, because I had been in kind of sitting through some of that. So I think there's some of that you can't recreate. But then in terms of like, once you have the project started in some form of like MVP and a little bit of traction, I think it's really about, you know, it's like you really grow the project of one interaction at a time with people in the community, like one issue, one PR at a time. And then and then you just gotta iterate like crazy and put, you know, passion and effort into it, and then build. If you want stuff to snowball, you need to be welcoming to a certain point. So it's pretty subtle exercise, I guess, right? Like in some ways too, and if you're too flexible too, that could be a risk, right? Like it's often talk about the BDFL, the benevolent dictator for life, in open source projects. You need to be hard. Like you look at Linus Torvald and the Linux project. Like sometimes it's been like really very hard on people. It's like, this is a bad idea. This idea is shit. We shouldn't do this.
A lot of those emails are
so there's
very
always
colorful.
yeah. So I think I've always done it like super respectfully. I think that's super important. But you need like clear direction, leadership, and like keep the fluff and the nonsense out of the project, or at least to keep the mission and vision for the project, the scope of the project, you know, somewhat clear. I think I could have done that better in the past in some of these projects too, where they became so big. Like Airflow is kind of everything too, right? Like it does so much. Where now it's not as good at certain things because it's a little bit less focused. But in a lot of ways, it has proven at this point that it's cope well, because, you know, there's like more than 100,000 organizations using, say, Airflow. So I think adoption speaks volume too. And it's like, you know, maybe it's not, in some ways there's a new generation of data engineering tool that are, I think, offer more guarantees, but they force you, they put more constraint in your way. So it's a trade-off of like, with more constraint, we can provide more guarantees. So you need this, you know, maybe there's more you need to do to respect the framework, but then if you do, you get more value off of it. Maybe Airflow had the right level of like constraint and guarantees at the time, to be less data driven. So give me your tasks and I'll run your tasks. There's not necessarily like, tell me everything about your data and like define your schemas up front. And you know, if I don't know your lineage, I can't run this stuff. Airflow is just like, okay, give me some tasks, I'll run them. For a lot of people at the time where they adopted it, you know, it worked. And that stuff is like extremely sticky. Like there's going to be people, if there's no, you know, meltdown of the planet, there's going to be people running Airflow in 100 years, probably somewhere, the same way we have, you know, mainframes today. So.
Nice. I'm very curious, like, you know, for Airflow in like the early days, right? Like once you hit that inflection point where you being like the main creator can no longer sort of oversee all the different sort of aspects of it, where you do need to rely on like community members, like how do you go about like picking the right people, and how do you like kind of foster that relationship?
Yeah, so I think like fostering is just kind of one interaction at a time, right? So then being welcoming, and I'd say like spend more cycle with the related to the impact of the people that they've had and their commitment. So a lot of people, you know, I've talked to so many people at so many companies, and sometimes like entire companies are like, hey, we want to put 12 people on this project, like you need to work with us so that to enable us, and in the end, like they never really get started. So basically saying that they're like the best way to define we're going to put energy is how much return you've gotten from putting energy on individual organization and people you interact with. So it's as if you're a manager and someone in your team is like super promising, maybe you have multiple interns, and then one is just like every time you help them a little bit, it multiplies their impact capacity. Like spend more cycles with the people that you support it. Yeah, it does make sense. Though sometimes you have the opposite where it's really natural to go and help the people struggling more, or to spend more time with the people that make the most noise, for instance, as opposed to the people that have the best track record. So that's a thing there, but it's the fundamental the reason why open source is working so well is it's a meritocracy, right? And then you really gotta embrace that. So it's really, you define empowerment and maybe how much you help and support people based on the accumulated merit. And of course, you need to provide a way for people to go from zero to some amount of merit, right? But then from that point, I think it's a good governance model for a lot of things, and definitely for software. I'm like, would the meritocracy work? So let's change the U.S. government. Capitalism didn't work. Like instead we're gonna try meritocracy from here.
Smooth transition. So we were chatting with Mitchell Hashimoto,
the HashiCorp.
Exactly. I thought like he had this really cool framework of like dealing with trolls that he like learned from working at the Apple Store, of this whole acronym of like APPLE. I thought it was quite cool. Like I'm sure there were a lot of trolls through like Airflow and Preset. Like how did you go about handling the problem children?
That I'm curious now to go back and listen to that episode, but to hear the framework. But I've seen a lot less like negative deception around the communities I've been part of and around software and GitHub than I thought I would.
Interesting.
If you asked me like, hey, you got to interact with like, thousands of people, what percentage do you think are going to be a bad interaction? And I would have said like, oh, there's so much like stupidity in the world, and like you go out there in the world and you see so much like friction and troll and just negative emotion everywhere. But like to me, like in my professional life and my open source life, I've seen very little people that are very deceptive or like trolling or just like acting like a douche, right? Like we don't see a whole lot of that on repositories. There's definitely some instances of it, but they're few and far between.
I think what you're saying, Max, is that data engineers are very nice people, which I think that was very subtle, but very nice, very nice.
No, but even like Silicon Valley is like, if you work in Silicon Valley, and the companies I worked at has always been like educated, nice people. Like, I think there's a handful of people that I could look back and say like, I've had numerous bad interaction with this individual. I think good organizations, or at least the companies that I've been lucky to be at, companies with really good culture, with good immune system around like just not letting an asshole like stick around for very long.
I see. What about like say people with good intentions but like poor execution?
Well, so that's more the danger, I would say, right? So that's where I would say like cut your losses there. So if someone opens a very large and ambitious PR and a little bit of guidance does not course correct them, then you should probably spend more time and attention on the PRs that are promising and the people that are learning faster. So it goes with what I was saying before. So like spend your time where you can be helpful and where there is a good outcome without too much of your time and commitment and support.
Got it.
So I would say like focus on the committers, the contributors that I've demonstrated so far that they're doing well. And sometimes you might see from the first PR, the first draft, you're like, oh, this is someone that knows what they're doing, or from the first like review on, like you get a pretty good sense for it.
And what do you think are the attributes that makes like a really good open source contributor?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. In some ways, it's not that different from a good software engineer, right? One thing that I say that might be an interesting thought for people outside of everything that's already been said around, what are the good skills to be a good software engineer, data engineer, is like one thing that I think is extremely undervalued in software engineering in general and technical position is just like code orientation, like just being able to find your way in a large code base, because like you end up on like these messy big repos that are layered with stuff, right? Like you join a company like Facebook, there's like 2 big mono repos with 100 different ways of doing things and like thousands of microservices. similarly, like, you want to contribute to Airflow, Superset, or really any open source project out there, where do you start? Like, maybe you want to change the color of a button. Like, where is that button? Where do you find it? Or you want to add a field to a dashboard. That's the common data engineering problem I'm so disinterested in. That's like, oh, you need to carry, like, we get this data from HubSpot and there's a dashboard and this thing, and then we got to carry this new custom property all the way through the pipeline to the end. What is that pipeline? Like, where's this dashboard pointing to? So I think code orientation, being able to find your way in a large repository and figuring out what to do and how to decipher everything that's been done before and why is extremely key. And that's some stuff you only get through building context and spending time in cycles, like doing this in one repo. And a lot of this is transposable, right? What the patterns you learn on a project or repository, when you get to a new one, you might find your way a little bit better. So it's like your navigation skill that you got in some village or in some country, they do transpose when you get to a new village or a new country in some capacity.
Yeah. That's a nice analogy. For me, that I was really glad that I left my first company because of exactly that, because the first company I was at was like super green. Like, I built like a lot of stuff that my team was working on. So then kind of knew like where all the things are, like how things are set up. And then so when I left and I went to the second company, it's like legacy code, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, why is there shit everywhere? Like,
Yeah.
Mine was also pretty shit, but it's very different. I don't like this. So other than going to a new company, like, is there any recommendations, I guess, on like engineers like wanting to get better at this, like, code orientation?
Yeah, I mean, I think open source is always an outlet, right? Because there's all this code out there that you can go and get lost into, or try to find your way. So then you have to find something worthy to work on, but that's usually pretty easy. So maybe venturing off, is a good thing. And one way to venture off is to transplant yourself. Like, there's no better way than like moving to a new country to force yourself to learn a new culture, right? And develop a lot of these like these skills that are really important in terms of like orientation, like figuring out how to make things work in a different context. But I would say, yeah, I think like generally to force yourself outside your comfort zone, it's a good thing. Something that's interesting related to that is like, I learned so much at Facebook. For me, it was like big kickoff of my career. That's why I changed from like old school to new school in some ways. And I felt like that's where I first got really empowered. But they were very limited in their own stack in a lot of ways. Like, they did things their own way. And it's interesting. I say they now. I said we for so long talking about this. But yeah. So I think like to go to Airbnb, and then that forced us into the open source ecosystem, because there was no like at Facebook's like their own like orchestration, their own like build system. There's a solution for everything, and all these names that you learn in these contexts of like how the microservices work together. Like, all of that is not that useful outside of Facebook. You need to do that translation of like, oh, Kubernetes is the equivalent of Tupperware, right? But it's so much more useful to know Kubernetes than Tupperware, because Tupperware has no use outside of Facebook, right? So I think like to go to a more open place where you can, I mean, that's a great thing for everyone's career, to use more open source, because everything you learn there is transposable to the rest of the world. And then any work that you do in the open is also recognized and visible to everyone forever, as opposed to you leave a proprietary company and then no one knows. There's no track record that's visible to anyone, so they have to like interview you or read your resume to figure out your extended reputation. So working on open source, always a great thing, getting involved in different things.
I assume working in open source, like depending on the project, it's like you pick your it's like playing a game, you're picking your difficulty level, right? Like depending on like the culture, or like how much sort of infrastructure is around that project, or like what the people are like, for maybe someone starting, okay, I guess you can't pick Airflow and Preset, that would be kind of cheap. But outside of those two, like, are there like easier projects to start with. Maybe that's not in Rust.
Yeah, well, so I think it's all relative to where you're starting from, but I think like if the purpose is what's most important, because if you're like, hey, I'm gonna go and try to contribute, I'm gonna pick a project that's cool, like I'm gonna pick Kubernetes and try to go contribute something. I think that's totally cool, and it's good to do it, and it's probably good to get exposure to these big projects too, like that have like hundreds of contributors and of active contributors. But I would say to scratch your own itch is a really you pip install a library, it doesn't quite do what you need it to do, or you find a bug, or it'd be nice if this method existed, right. To go and then start with just scratching your itch in someone else's repository is a really nice way to get involved, because it will force this little bit of exploration I was talking about, developing the code navigation skill. Like, okay, what is this? Okay, I pip install this library. I'm reading the documentation. The method I need is not there. The object that I'm using is, or the documentation is not clear on something. Let me get to the bottom of this. Then you have to get in that repo and figure out your orientation in that repo, clone it, contribute something, interact with someone. And I don't know, maybe eventually like make a friend along the way, and then be like, oh, I'm going to start using this for more things and advocate for it and contribute more to it. So I would say don't try to find an artificial like
easy mode.
Yeah, it's like, or if you're a data engineer, you use Airflow every day. I mean, like really, I know you said to not use the example, but I think it applies just as well, right? Like whatever you use daily, you're like, oh, this is my toolkit.
Yeah.
I think it's really good to spend some time like using if you use an axe, you should spend some time sharpening your axe, and sharpening your axe in software often might mean contributing to an open source project you use.
Yeah, one thing which I would just add is like in general for engineers, especially early in their career, like read open source code, but like similar to what you said, if you're using a specific toolkit, just go read about that. Even if initially things just don't make sense, read it over and over again, and read code more than you end up writing, because I think just navigating these large code bases helps one understand how to go about organizing their own code eventually, and then making it over time easier to find things like, oh, I need this thing, how does it do with this thing? Oh, I know where to look, or at least I can navigate my way through it much faster.
Oh yeah, is that how you got started with Kubernetes, Ronak?
For me, it was pretty much that. So I work a lot on, primarily on Kubernetes over the last 4 years. Yes, and it's like a lot of things. Kubernetes, with any project, there are many ways to do a certain thing, and then you're like, well, I don't know what the right way to do this is, and in many cases, like, well, why does this thing operate this way? The documentation says X. Is it really true? So I think developing that practice of always go to the code to see what it actually means and how it actually works, like that's where you will know the guarantees, and documentation could be out of date. And navigating the code base also help at least me understand a lot more about just the system and some of the principles that that the system has been built with, and I'm sure it's true for other open source projects too.
It makes the leap of contributing feel like a lot easier too, right? You're in the code, you're like, oh, I know where that would be and how I would change it to do certain things.
And definitely makes the system less scarier. Like you're like, oh, this is such a giant system. How can I even go about understanding something? Was like, I have this one question. Let me try to get answer to that one question. And along the way, you kind of know that I don't need to look at the other 10,000 lines. I just care about these 3. So it's a matter of finding these 3.
Yeah, a big thing is like the imposter syndrome. A lot of people are like, oh, would they accept a PR from me? Or like there's that. I think I've heard that so many times of like, oh wait, do they even accept PR? And then someone gonna make fun of me? Or I don't know what exactly happened. But like, I think people are just like, oh, there's a line here. There's an imaginary line that I absolutely cannot cross. And it might be a difficulty thing, it might be a self-value or self-confidence issue or this or that, but that's something that we need to shoot down actively in open source. I don't know what the right place is. I mean, the right place to do this is like in a place like here, to say like anyone can, like if you contribute a PR, people will be like super happy to receive it. If you open an issue, you contribute a PR, even if it's misinformed, incomplete, draft, there's a nice little draft button and you just put it as a draft,
for discussion.
But like people will And people will be stoked to see a new face on the repo, and I've, as I said, like I've seen very, very, very little like negative interactions anywhere, and then most of the places where I've seen it is like entitled users, right? People are like, I can't believe you don't offer a way to do. I'm like just contribute it. Like seriously, it's like I'm not like wait, what relationship do we have? I don't know you. I don't know what the company you work for. You know, it's fun. It's interesting that you think we owe you that. You know, but I think most people have the bias of being overly cautious. We need to fix that. Maybe if we fix that, we're going to get more entitlement, which we're going to have to fight back on. But overall, I think the problem we have is we need more empowerment, be more welcoming, and for people to just be like, oh yeah, I can totally, if I pip install it, I can open a PR on it for sure.
I would just plug in a tool here, like it's not a tool, but a company. So GitHub is amazing for hosting code, obviously, and majority of open source repos live there. I would say for code navigation, personally, I love SourceGraph. Like from a code navigation and search perspective, it's at least my go-to tool, and I know a lot of my colleagues too who use it as well. Significantly better than what you get with GitHub, and makes code navigation much more easier. It's like you have an IDE on the browser when you're searching open source code, and I think GitHub can use some improvements there.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a great thing, like knowing that code navigation is so important and so potentially challenging. You know, having better tooling there really helps. So for me, I guess a place where like I still use Vim, I don't use a lot of IDE. I'm just old school because the stuff.
I mean,
This is why I like this guy.
And I'm not saying that it's better. It's just like bad habits. I've got all the muscle memory, and like I like to have my shell really close.
Wait. Like Vim in shell or like VI mode within like VS Code? Just trying to get the gauge.
Oh no, definitely. I'm in Tmux, and so
Oh my
Tmux
gosh,
I'm in the shell. So I'm on the shell. But it's not because like I think every year I'm like, oh, I need to teach myself, you know, a proper IDE. And then I don't, because like I just I just use like my old method. I get grep a lot. Like I just like the way I navigate code is kind of my own way of doing things, using like shell and bash, just in general. But I think like I think the new world of software engineering, you know, you can have these great graphs of saying like, oh, this method is part of this class. Here's the inheritance scheme, and it's all visual. You can click around. You can do that in Vim in some other ways. Like we all have different ways of doing the same things. And then what's hard is like if you have muscle memory, and then it's a mental model.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I can't do it, but I think like I would watch it on Twitch, right? It's just like someone who's like really, really good. Because you just see like without clicking anything, right? Just with all the switches and it's quite nice.
Yeah. So talking about open source projects, like you came to Airbnb from Facebook, and obviously you knew a lot of these tools existed, and there were some gaps, and you wanted to build something new. For Airbnb, what was that pitch like? I mean, you were a data engineer on the team. You're like, hey, let's build a new tool and open source it. And they said, yes, sounds like a great idea. Like, what?
Well, there was a little bit of entitlement. Well, so I joined with that premise. So part of, like I was very happy at Facebook, but I liked the idea of like moving often, just to kind of force yourself to experience new environments and stuff like that. But I moved. That was the premise on which I decided to join. Was like, I'm going to get to work on this problem, and I'm likely to be able to open source the stuff if everything goes well. And then actually between the job, I took a break of about 2 weeks, and I started writing Airflow and in a vacation in Mexico on the beach. I'm like, class DAG, does it go capital DAG or D, lowercase AG? So it's like, I remember those moments of saying like, okay, well, what's the executor I should use? A local one, a celery one. So what are we gonna need? That was, pre-Kubernetes. But yeah, so and then that landed on my own personal repo as I joined. And then I was like, okay, let's try to use this stuff here and internally. But I think the play for them, I mean, for organizations sponsoring open source is there's a bunch of things. One is like attracting talent. Like I would not have gone without that guarantee. But then I think there's the huge, like, I think for a long time it mattered more, or when the market gets more competitive it matters more, but the aura of the engineering team is really important for these like engineering driven organization. So for Airbnb to be like, hey, we do have these 12 open source projects, and you can see everything we do out in the open. You might get to work on some of this stuff in the open if you join, because it is kind of exciting for people. So it's more on like talent acquisition and retention, I think, is the real thing. Because like the angle of like we get like free contribution to projects we care about, I think is you can play that card, and like somewhat arguable, but like generally to me has been not a super net positive, though. Like I don't know, or maybe that's early on in the projects where I was most active, but like the fact that, say, Airbnb is they have a huge amount of airflow, and the fact that airflow is much greater than it would have been if it would have been like one person working on that problem in isolation is a really positive thing. Now people can come in and out Airbnb and know the orchestration.
Makes sense. So you had these two open source projects, and I think both came out when you were in Airbnb, like Airflow and Superset.
Yeah.
And you worked at Lyft after Airbnb, and then you eventually started Preset. What prompted you to start a company around Superset?
Well, so a bunch of things there, but I think the move from Airbnb to Lyft, I was ready to, I just get like this feeling I got to keep moving, So after like 3 years at Airbnb, I'm like, okay, where am I going next? And I also wanted to plant the seed of like Superset, try it in different contexts, and then plant that seed and create a team there too around it. And I was just really excited to work on more geospatial real-time stuff. It was just like seemed really fun to work on. And then in terms of like starting the company, so the VCs started approaching me. It was in the fall of like, or probably before then, but like in 2018. And I think it was as a result of things like, HashiCorp being super successful, Confluent, Databricks. They're like, oh shit, like commercial open source can be a really good business model in some cases. So what are the open source projects out there that are getting tractions, that are popular? So a lot of people found me as this became a pattern. Martin Casado at E16Z, I think, like was part of his thesis of like data, open source. Like we're gonna like the modern data stack. It's gonna be like open source. So they found me like, why don't you start a company? I was like, I don't know. I love to just chase IPOs and go from tech startup to tech startup and work on open source. And that sounds a little stressful. I'm not sure if I don't really want to. I don't have the MBA type skills. I'm not sure if I want to acquire them. And but then I realized too that, so I was I think I just turned 40, and then I realized it was just like a really unique opportunity. The VCs were like, hey, we want to fund you very, very well, and you don't need to write a business plan and all this stuff. Like you just really, you're in a position that a lot of wannabe founders wish they were in, which is like you get like a top VC with good investment. We skipped the seed round, went straight to Series A. So I was like, I'm going to regret it for my whole life if I don't take this opportunity at this time. Very unique opportunity. So, and the rest is kind of history. And it's been super, in terms of like, I talked a few times already about like taking yourself out of your comfort zone to learn new things and maybe become a better professional, a better human as a result. Like that was the single most important thing I've done, to just like transplant myself to this different planet of being a founder. And it's been super great. It's been a fun ride, but with intense ups and downs.
What was the biggest like surprises, I guess, compared to expectations?
I think one thing was you kind of think the VCs are a little bit evil, and that the oversight is going to be very intense. Like basically, like I'm gonna be, the moment I take this money, it's lots of millions of dollars. The heat is on, right? Like people are gonna be on my ass looking for results at all time, and the pressure and the tension is gonna come from the top down. And then what I realized was like, not that there's no pressure. The stakes are extremely high, but it's mostly self-inflicted, and it's mostly like, oh, if I do well, I can do very, very well, if the company does well. And then you make promises to, every investor, but also every employee, every customer, every prospect. So people, little by little, the pressure goes up, but it's not necessarily inflicted by the investors or the organization. And then it's surprising how much just latitude you have as to how you run your business. Like no one is like, oh, you got to do A or B. It's just like you're like, okay, well, you build the business you want to build it, which is great.
So you definitely don't come across as the MBA types. I mean, you see one right now as a founder and CEO of the company. You're deep into the trenches and actually writing code, which is super impressive to see. How did you go about thinking about the business plan, for example? Like this is not a skill set that many engineers typically have, and I would say engineers probably make the worst customers. So how did you put yourself in that shoe and say, okay, this is how I can build a business around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you take like the challenges of being a founder as a first class problem. You go to the first principle, and then you try to figure out how you should organize your time and where you need to seek advice from, and what's most important to work on, today, this week, this month, this year. Find the right advisor and the right people to surround yourself with. So it's nothing unusual on the answer here. On coding, I think it's like maybe by the time we got to a certain scale, it just didn't make sense to do any of the coding that the company would depend on to succeed. Right, so then it's more like, oh, I think early on I was like definitely very involved, like when we're like less than 10, still like acting as a very active engineer and PM, and then over time I think distancing myself from that and more saying like, okay, I code because I need that as an outlet, or it's good for my mental health or something like that. I was just like, or that's how I've been realizing myself for the past 15 years, that to not have that as an outlet that I know that I'm good at, is difficult. So then I distanced myself from that, and there's like a long period where I didn't code at all. There's just like too much stuff to manage. And then I think recently, yes, I decided to spend more time to wear the CTO hat, more often, which includes like being in the code base is a very positive thing to be around. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey there, and you learn things along the way, like maybe things that you really love that you didn't know you might love, and then some things that you're like, okay, I know I need to find someone to do that for me because I'm not that interested in that.
Wait, was there something that you found that you really like you didn't know that you loved?
Yeah, I think, and it goes with like what you're good at is generally what you love, so where you can assign passion. But like I love product marketing in general now, so just like messaging, positioning, pricing, packaging, some of the strategy, right? Like how do we think and expose about like the component of the product, right, to the market. So and that can shape. That shapes that can shape the roadmap, the product direction too, right? So so maybe the layer of like, if you have like scope, mission, vision, scope for a product, like the product marketing can shape the direction of these things. It can apply that stuff, but it can also shape the direction of it. I think like I was doing it naturally in open source in some ways, right? Like Airflow had a logo and a one-liner in some way, like what it does, what it doesn't do, right? Like there was if you think of a README of an open source project, it's effectively product marketing. It's how you present your project to the potential community, right? So that's a thing. Like I generally hate operation, but it's a must do. But like just things that are more repetitive. Financial planning is kind of interesting, like modeling stuff in Excel, I don't know, but there's the diversity of these things is what's interesting. And then management has never been super, like I like, spending time with people too, but like managing, I prefer like coaching, leadership than management.
Got it. When you said free therapy, or when you were viewing coding in that lens, like how do you go about picking what to work on when you see it as free therapy?
What to work on?
Yeah,
I don't know. So it's like it's a mix of like if you're dog fooding your user of the product, you can fix the little things that annoy you on the product. So sometimes I don't really like CSS, but I hate crooked pictures on the wall. My OCD triggers. So like so some of that is like really easy. Usually doesn't get in the way. It's non-critical work. And then about going more meta, like recently I got closer to the repo and got really into developer experience, Docker, Docker Compose, Helm chart, like just making sure that the stuff like all the CI/CD stuff, Docker builds, like getting that stuff to actually run. I think that's more of a getting more meta on the problem as you get more senior. I don't know what it is. I'm not that passionate about that. I'm like, I kind of hate GitHub Actions, and like it's really hard to work with. But maybe it's like the repo really needed it too.
I think
That's cool.
the pattern you're describing, I've noticed that pattern, obviously different context, different scale, but translating that to a tech lead instead of a founder, for example, like a tech lead being in the trenches initially designing exactly what the system should do and should not do, and then slowly they go out, kind of spread the word for it within the company, outside the company if it's open source. And then eventually they start looking at it from a user standpoint, and they start fixing these things that you mentioned. It's like, well, someone should be able to get clone and get build, like something built right away, for example, improving the CI/CD pipeline. So it makes sense to put on that user hat and seeing how the product can be improved, not just the engineering aspect of it.
Yeah, the developer, they're both like user experience and developer experience. They're both like closer to human, which is kind of interesting. And they're both like kind of, if you think of like the development pipeline of like what's, middleware, or they're both like one, CSS is like probably the most like veneer layer on the application. And then CI/CD is like the deep end of the back end. Cool. So, but it's like extreme, but in some ways it comes full circle, because in both cases, one is about user experience for a developer, and then user experience for a user of the product. And then the middle, maybe it's like because the middle is like gets so tangled up and complicated. You're like, if I touch anything in here, and like it's a bag of knowledge. You start touching it, and then you gotta get deeper. So that maybe that's why I'm staying away from the guts.
Yeah. And you don't want to be in the blocking path.
Then you need the therapy for the free therapy.
That's it. It's not that. Yeah. Then you need some extra real therapy on top of that.
So for like a listener, right, that's like, yo, this Max guy is pretty cool. I want to do what he does. I want to make the next Airflow, but for LLMs. Like, what do you... Okay, I don't think it would be fair to ask you like what that would mean, or like in terms of like what specific project, but like, what does that journey look like, right? Because like for you join like big companies, you see like how things work at scale. Like, what would your advice be to this engineer?
Well, so first thing I would say, don't be a founder. It doesn't. I think we just like glorify the founder. I think like it's been like overly glorified, and it's not all that fun. I think it's a good thing to tell people to not be a founder, because like you need the skill that you need to succeed is like this like delusional, like I don't care what you think, I'm gonna do it regardless. So we're kind of testing that with telling people that we're the founder. Nice. Yeah, you need, because you need some of that. So people need to break through, like screw this guy Max who sat down on this podcast, and the other people that told me not to be a founder. I'm still gonna be a founder. So I think it's good overall to put that message out there.
Nice.
Unless you like chewing glass and like swimming in sub-zero water, and like it's just like this stuff that's like kind of more brutal. But then in terms of like a question on like how to start a project, I think to be in tune with your environment and its needs and skills, and the kind of holes in the market offering for open source specifically. Like, wouldn't it be great if there was a tool that allowed me to do test driven development type stuff with prompt engineering? Like, it doesn't exist. Well, maybe I can create a thing there. So I think it's better when it comes from within and scratching your own itch, and the use case and the hole that you observe from a place that you're very, very familiar with, right? So that's key. For me, there's 2 projects I'm looking at that are like mostly in the early kind of validation phase, that if people wanted to get involved to kind of run with the thing or with the idea or with some of the the assets and the thinking that I put together. I can kind of pitch these projects and people can look at it. But and maybe as an example too of like the kind of projects that could be interesting to someone, and not necessarily like, oh, take it and run, or come and collaborate with us and get it started. But the first one is around semantic layer, and I know like DBT's coming up with a good like metrics layer, semantic layer that's super interesting. We're integrating with it at preset, but then we've had a hackathon and a set of like new ideas that extend upon this idea. So the world really need a universal open source semantic layer that works well and is simple. So if you look, maybe we'll put the link in the show note, but I think it's at preset.io/allstars. So it's SQL All-Star. It's a semantic layer that works as a virtual database. So you put your semantics of like what are your metrics and dimension, and which you map your schema as in all the semantic layers. Or you say this table is going to be joined, this column is a metric, this is a dimension, and you organize all your stuff as code as it should. So similar to LookML from that perspective, but then it's exposed as a virtual database. So you have a table called star. So you can say select stuff from star, and star becomes we would transpile your SQL behind the scenes. So it's exposed as a large flat data set, but behind the scene we transpile your SQL to do the underlying joins that need to be done. So it's a cool idea, and there's just some other ideas around that, around progressive adaptability and having the semantic layer or help you in terms of guessing the semantics of your schema. Your schema already has information. You should be able to figure out which tables you can join and how, what looks like a metric and a dimension already. So the semantic can be mostly inferred, progressively adaptable. You can enrich it over time and still get value from day zero. And it's exposed as a virtual database so that every BI tool out there is already compatible with it because it's a SQL interface. That was one idea.
And I guess so, because everything's more codified, like then it makes like the LLM sort of improvements and stuff. Like the
LLM and goal on this semantic layer, there's two angles I can think of now. One is like, well, the LLM can help you define your semantic layer, like set up your semantics. But then if you do have your semantics set up, it becomes like a map for the LLM to better understand your schema, and maybe instead of generating SQL, the LLM might do better with the abstraction layer than it does without it. So because the semantic layer is there to help business users self-serve in BI tools. So that means that if it helps business user self-serve, it should help an LLM, any form of intelligence, self-serve. So that's one project. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get deeper into this one before.
I have a question.
Sorry.
So like for people who might not know, what is a semantic layer?
Oh yeah. So the semantic layer is, you can think of. So maybe I'll start with the purpose. But the purpose of the semantic layer is to help more people, namely like business users, self-serve with their data without necessarily like knowing SQL or understanding as much of the underlying data model. So it bridges the gap between, the semantic layer is a bit of a map of your database, and it maps the metrics and dimension in more like business term, right? So instead of having cryptic table names and column names that you don't necessarily know how to join, you need to write SQL to get to make sense of, we expose a layer on top of that has the map of the physical layer plus metrics and dimension, pretty label, pretty descriptions, so that people can just drag and drop these things, and behind the scene we generate the SQL.
Pretty cool.
So that's the general idea, and a lot of these things historically have been part of the BI tool, so they're proprietary by nature and they're not shareable across tools. So that's a bit of a problem if you use multiple BI tool, which most companies do. So whatever you do in Looker, you can't really take with you on the Tableau or Superset or any other tool. So a lot of value there in having like an open source universal semantic layer, define as code, exposes a virtual database. So it's some cool ideas. And so there's a repo out there that's mostly just early scaffolding of what a project might look like. Cool. Then the other thing, I think that the other need that we identified is something around data access policy as code. So every company, and the bigger the company, I think the more of a reality that is. But every company needs to define groups of users and what data access they should have, and mostly for analytics purposes, right? Like, of course, like every company needs to define like rules and access of every user to different systems, but this would be more targeted towards data access policy. So you probably have some Snowflake, some BigQuery, some database left and right, different BI tools, and you can say certain people have access to certain tables or columns or schemas, and maybe this kind of category of user has access to the schema, but not the PII, that, in here or there. So the other project is it would be called Governator, with the aesthetic of our Arnold Schwarzenegger for sure, like somewhere there in the logo. I think we have a logo that got Midjourney to produce, nice. But so and then Governator, you would define your data access policy as code, and it can push and pull. Or as code or as YAML, right, in a repo. So it's like in a file system and repo, so you can know exactly who has access to what and who gave access to what. And, you know, when you change the access, you do it in the repo, so you know who, you know, gave access to what when. And then there would probably be a CLI or CI/CD type tool where you can push and pull to different, you know, sources and destinations. So you could pull whatever you put in Snowflake as a data access policy rule, stamp it as code, change it, push it back, or push it to other systems. And that's also a problem for us that we have, which is it's good for sometimes the BI tool needs to know about your access rule, so we know which charts and dashboard to show you. Right. But often you don't want to have a service account that has access to everything, and the BI tool enforce the data access policy. You want to enforce it at both layers, because the user might want to go straight to the Snowflake UI or the BigQuery UI console, and then to have consistent, you know, what they see, what they have access to. So this tool would allow for people to manage, you know, data access policy centrally and synchronize across BI tools, databases, and things like that.
I imagine the access simulation would be pretty interesting to build out and pretty core, right? Because it's kind of like, I remember for IAM on AWS, it was such a pain to work with, like before they actually kind of had more, like made it user friendly to actually test out like different policies and how that impacts things instead of just, but yeah.
Yeah, when it's managed as code, you know, and that's a theme in my career, like for prompt optimize for Airflow is like, you know, data pipelines as code, but like when things are managed as code, you can test them, you can version them, you can review them, you can know who changed what when. And then you can CI/CD a bunch of things. So before you deploy, you know, your data access policy, you can run a bunch of tests to say like make sure data scientists, simulated data scientists, make sure they don't have access to financial data, for instance, or something like that. But make sure they cannot get push on this repo because they're gonna break everything.
So you in the advice you mentioned to people, don't be a founder. Unless they want to chew glass or swim in sub-zero temperatures. So Guang asked the question about surprises, but your voice makes me ask, like, what have been the challenges of being a founder in this case, especially when you are building a company around an open source project?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of things. I mean, the first thing is like, you know, taking yourself out of your comfort zone and learning a bunch of things that you may or may not be passionate about, but it doesn't matter because it's what it takes to succeed, right? So then you're like, okay, now I'm putting myself in a situation where I have to learn new things that are really important, really core to this business succeeding, and I may or may not like that. So unless like, you know, you might love these things or you love to be outside your comfort zone, then that's a bit of an exercise. You don't know how it's going to go, and then the stakes are very high. So sometimes I don't know, these things like go together, but like reward and recognition is really important for everyone. Everyone wants to be kind of recognized and rewarded, but it comes usually with, you know, hardship or the difficulty level of what you take on, right? So if you want to be a volunteer for an organization or work part-time or be an advisor, it can be rewarding, but it's not going to be as rewarding as, you know, doing the real thing and, you know, busting your ass for years and things like that. So but these things, like, there's a danger in putting yourself in a situation where the stakes are so high, you know, that the potential for reward recognition is very high, but it's also like the risk of like, coming short on things is very high too, and the stakes are really high. So unless you want to be really hardcore, like a more progressive approach in life to things is probably better. Like climbing the ranks at some companies and like making sure along the way that it's like I am still comfortable managing a larger team or being a little bit closer to being an executive at a company. I still like this progression. I'm going to take another step in that direction. As a founder, you're like, okay, let's just go and throw myself in a completely different area, and it should be fun, right? Or I might get rich, or I don't know, like what people really think, but I would say like a more progressive approach to the things you do in life is probably better. Unless, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you want to do it. We might want to do it, and people do it. But think about it, cautiously before doing this big jump.
Yeah. Good advice. By the way, you mentioned you generated this. I'm doing a hard pivot here. You mentioned you generated the Governor logo using Midjourney. So we spent a lot of time trying to generate logo for our podcast using a bunch of these AI tools. I spent significant evenings on just generating logos on DALL-E, on ChatGPT. One thing which I found was like, you give it a prompt and they come up with a logo, which kind of is okay, but if you ask them to change something or put in a text, they are terrible. Like if I say spell software and have it in the logo, they never do that. I never got the system to do that.
Yeah, they're learning how to write still. Yeah, so you have to ask like, do not write anything, and then you add it in Photoshop, or you use like what it's good at, and then you add the layer of like what you're good at.
See, we just need to get better at like prompting instead, or like just better working with these tools instead of like just Sorry, what you're
I was gonna show the logo that I made. If I
whoa, that's
pretty good.
That is really good. Wow, wait, you got Midjourney to do that for you?
I think it might have been ChatGPT.
Wow.
But there was definitely it'd be interesting to pull this session because I did fight with it quite a bit because I wanted like both the governor, I wanted both Arnie and the database logos. That was pretty tricky, but I got it to do this thing. I wanted the red eye because at some point it comes up with a red eye and like, I love the red eye, I want it. Then it stops doing it, so you have to ask for it and it doesn't want to do it. But there was definitely like a bunch of prompts here for me to get to this.
Oh, wow.
So that's, if you want to check it out, so that's on my personal GitHub. The project is kind of early. It has mostly just information architecture and some of the ideas are behind it.
Yeah.
And the other one is called All Stars. That's on the preset one. A little bit further. Uses some of the, I don't know if it's legal, but that's the Mario font here. But that's a pretty fun one to read. So if you're interested in semantic layers or the future of them, that's probably a fun repo to read.
Oh,
awesome. We'll do.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation, Max. Thank you so much for taking the time. This was super amazing for us.
This was super fun. Yeah, so like really interesting topics overall. So glad I showed up on the show.
And we'll add links to all the things we talked about: preset, superset, Airflow, the new repos that you mentioned, Governor, All Stars, so that people can go find these projects and hopefully contribute to them. And we'll also link to your profile, of course, so that people can find you as well.
Yeah, that'd be great if people wanted to run with these projects, and be because like right now I don't have the bandwidth. I want to work on these things, but it's like I don't have like, we're pretty busy at Preset working on a bunch of other things too. But it's likely I'll work on some of these things. So if people wanted to get a little bit closer and help,
awesome.
Lead on these projects, it could be fun.
If either of these projects get a contribution through this podcast, I would count that as a win.
Yeah, or even I mean I think like in a lot of like what's great about some of these things and my intention and putting the README out there is like, oh, we might build this stuff, but I think it's also just the ideas, and the empowerment. Like you just put the idea out there and someone might run with it. It might be like, hey, you know what, I have a different twist on this too. So for me, I don't just think like code should be open and free. It's like ideas too. I'm huge against like intellectual property. I just think these two words don't fit well together. Like intellectual and property. No, it's like the ideas want to be free. Code wants to be free too. So let's make that a reality.
Yeah, for sure.
I like that.
Well,
thanks so much, Max.
Cool. Thank you so much.
This was amazing.
Take care.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and learn more about us at softwaremisadventures.com. You can also write to us at hello@softwaremisadventures.com. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.